You're probably familiar with the term death roll, that infamous technique that's used by crocodiles to dismember their prey since they of course can't chew. Now, in most cases, creatures unlucky enough to fall victim to this kill tactic, they don't live to tell the tale, of course. However, the person in this story, they experienced this nightmare not just once, not twice, but 3 times, and against all odds, made it out alive. This is the true story of Val Plumwood's deadly encounter with one of nature's most formidable predators, the saltwater crocodile. Kakadu National Park in Australia's Northern Territory is one of the most dangerous wetlands on Earth. It's a place where the land floods in the wet season and basically turns into this maze of billabongs, swamps, and hidden channels. It's a world ruled by several species of venomous snakes like the death adder, the taipan, feral pigs, wild buffalo, and of course, saltwater crocodiles. And on one fateful day in 1985, it was 47-year-old Val Plumwood who paddled into this world in nothing more than a canoe. Now Val, she was no stranger to nature. She was a philosopher, she was an ecofeminist, she was a writer, an activist, and she spent years challenging the very idea that us humans were separate or superior to the natural world. She fought to get mining banned in Kakadu, and during her stay was staying at the East Alligator Ranger Station where Ranger Greg Miles allowed her to use the park's canoe. This canoe had served the park for years, and that day Greg asked Val to go out and take a look at some trails that he was looking to mark, some new trails. Now, he trusted her judgment, of course, because she was a very experienced bushwalker, and her advice really mattered and counted. Because the water looked calm, the weather seemed fine, and back then, crocodiles weren't considered such a serious threat to people because generations of hunting happened. And in the 70s, crocodiles became endangered, these salties did. It's because of game hunting, and they were hunting them for their skin. And the population actually, because of some conservation efforts that happened around the late 70s, it really bounced back very fast around the time of this attack. Val most likely was aware that there was conservation efforts being made, but maybe she wasn't aware just how much the population had rebounded by this time, because like I said, crocodiles weren't really considered a problem or a threat during this particular time. So Val, she set out on this canoe, and she was going to go mark these trails for Greg Miles, the ranger, and the day it started off pretty normal. It was hot, humid, and sticky. It was exactly what you'd expect in Kakadu during the wet season, and the water was calm, almost like glass. Val's paddling, she was paddling very easily, steadily, and for a while, she felt completely at peace out there. By the afternoon, the sky had shifted. What started as hazy blue turned into heavy, dark clouds, and insects, they started going quiet. The air felt heavier, and Val could sense that a storm was coming. She was deep in the park by this point, miles away from any help, and a part of her thought about turning back, but she still persevered and pushed forward, thinking this was all part of the experience, and that's when the rain came. Now, at first, it was just a few heavy drops, but within seconds, it was pouring so hard she could barely see a few yards in front of her. The calm water that she was paddling in, it turned rough, the landmarks disappeared, and Val basically had to fight to keep her canoe steady because of the elements. So it was around this time that Val spotted it. Near the edge of the reeds, floating in the water, was a long, dark shape. At first, she thought it was just a log, nothing unusual, but then the log moved. It pulled away from the bank against the current, and that's when Val realized that this was no log. After all, crocodiles were a significant part of this ecosystem, and she also knew that they were evasive most of the time. They usually slip under the water long before you even get close or even notice them. But the energy with this one felt different. Even though it's an ambush predator, Val could basically sense that this crocodile was on the hunt. Trusting her intuition, Val started paddling even faster, and she loved nature so much that she was basically telling herself this whole time that it's okay, it's not what you think, this crocodile isn't coming out to get you, you're just being paranoid. But despite this positive self-talk she was trying to give herself, she just couldn't shake this feeling that something was watching her, this feeling of being watched. It's probably something primal that evolved in us a long time ago, where we just know when we're being stalked by a predator. It's probably when the energy shifts in the air. Something to do with that, I assume. And so Val, as she's talking to herself, while she's trying to feed herself all these positive thoughts and emotions, suddenly this crocodile, it resurfaces once again. She sees its head, and it was massive. and Val watched as its nostrils and eyes surfaced just above the water. They locked directly on her, and this crocodile was just staring at her. It didn't charge, it didn't thrash, it just floated there, watching her for a moment. And for a moment, it was actually the philosopher in Val that was fascinated by this. She was staring into the eyes of a predator that had been perfecting its craft and hunting skills for millions of years. Despite this fascination of her, that philosopher of hers quickly faded away though, because fear immediately crept up as she dug her paddle deep into the water, pulling as hard as she could, and I guess that was her kind of snapping back into reality. And she started paddling really fast, so fast in fact that her arms were burning, her breath grew heavier, but no matter how hard she worked, the crocodile just continued to stay on her. And this really didn't feel like a random approach or a curious approach, but quite deliberate once again. She really felt, and she kept saying this in her writing, she was a beautiful writer, just how deliberate and how much she felt like she was being stalked as prey. So for a while, this croc was just shadowing her. It kept the same distance, never rushing, never leaving her sight, but then it started to close in. The water rippled with the power of its tail as it pushed forward. Val could see the ridges along its back. Now it's looking like a horror movie. She could see the sheer size of this croc. Now, in desperation, she turned the canoe to face it head on, hoping the move might confuse or intimidate it. For a second, it seemed to work because the crocodile did hesitate. It sank lower into the water. However, its eyes were still locked on her. She could still see its eyes. And as soon as it went back under, it wasn't long after that, it actually exploded out of the water with such force that it shattered the canoe, forced Val to fall into the water. She splashed into the murky lagoon. Her paddle was gone. She no longer has a canoe. And just like that, she was now fully at this crocodile's mercy. The water at this point swallowed her before she managed to swim to the surface, gasping, disoriented, only to see the croc's enormous head turning toward her. And before she could even try to swim away, the croc struck with such incredible speed, clamped its jaws down on her thigh with bone-crushing power. And this bite force is of course notoriously considered the strongest in the animal kingdom. And according to Val, the pain was like a white-hot flash that she was feeling during this time. So overwhelming, it erased every other thought that she had in her mind, especially those positive ones I was talking about earlier. And then it just became a matter of survival. This is when her world, as it was written in her writing, it was so eerie to read this, it began to spin. She later described this moment as the infamous death roll, that violent rotating technique that crocodiles use to drown their prey. She was in the midst of that, and over she was dragged under. The water was exploding in chaos. It was such a violent scene. Val said she felt like a rag doll caught in the jaws of a leviathan. Her chest burned. Her lungs were screaming for air. She could feel her leg tearing apart in its grip, the grinding, snapping of bone and tissue. But in the middle of that chaos, something unusual happened. Val recalled a strange, detached clarity. It was as if she was suddenly looking at herself from third person. She saw the great reptile for what it was. She realized that this was a magnificent, albeit terrifying, engine of survival. Now, pause real quick. To me, it's like, how do you even remember what you were thinking at that time? But maybe the human brain is so amazing that in hindsight, she was able to process it, because it took her like 11 years to even write about this after the incident. And probably she was able to realize there was much more meaning behind the thoughts she was thinking and much more depth in the thoughts that she was thinking. And so Val proceeded to say that during this time, while she was being death rolled, she saw herself as not a philosopher, not a person, not even as a conscious being with history, but the way a crocodile saw her, as prey, as food, and basically as a piece of meat. So later, Val said that at this point, her intellectual theories about humans and nature became brutally real. Like I was saying earlier, she really believed we weren't separate, we aren't superior, we're all part of it. This crocodile wasn't evil to her, it wasn't malicious, it was simply just doing what millions of years of evolutions had shaped it to do. According to her account, the animal proceeded to roll her again and again. The attack was so violent and powerful that Val felt her body break down a little more with each roll, and death was basically approaching with each roll. She knew her strength was fading and she likely wasn't going to make it out of this situation alive. Now, right after death rolling her, this is when the croc began to drag her toward the bank, And Val knew exactly what this crocodile was doing at this point. She realized that it was pulling her to a spot where it could pin her body down and begin feeding on it, so just ripping off chunks. She was nearly unconscious at this point, drifting in and out from shock and from blood loss. But then, through the blur of water and pain, her eyes could catch a sliver of hope, a low paperbark tree with its branches just dipping into the water. The moment she saw this, Val knew that this was her only chance to get out of this alive, and just when this crocodile was beginning another roll, she would reach out with everything that she had towards this branch, and her fingers managed to close around that wet, rough bark, and she held on with everything that she had. Now the force had nearly tore her arm off from its socket, and as she's hanging on to this branch, she felt her mangled leg rip even further as the crocodile's spin met the resistance of this tree. It was like a gruesome tug-of-war for her, with her body as the rope. And then around this time, something shifted. The crocodile loosened its grip for just a fraction of a second. Now, whether it was startled by the resistance or simply the repositioning, this was all the time she really needed, and she struck at the opportunity to get out of this in one piece, or at least as close to it as possible. And so, with one desperate last pull, she tore her leg free from its jaws, and she was out. She was alive, but horribly injured, and she knew that she still had to get herself medical attention as soon as possible, otherwise things could get really bad as she's way out in the bush. So she managed at this point to drag herself onto the muddy bank. Her leg at this point was shredded muscle and skin tore back all the way to the bone. She could see white splinters of her own leg exposed through her wounds. She was alive, but she knew this wasn't good. She was still deep in Kakadu, bleeding heavily, and the crocodile, not to mention, was somewhere out there still. So the next hours, they were pure survival. She began crawling, using her arms and her one good leg to drag herself through the mud, roots, and reeds. Every moment was agony. And that very wilderness, which she had been admiring the beauty of just hours earlier, now turned into this hostile and merciless place for her. Sharp reeds, they cut at her skin as she was crawling through them. Insects swarmed to the smell of her blood. The heat pressed down on her. It was heavy and it was suffocating. She talked to herself constantly, however, and did anything that she could to stay awake, stay positive, and keep moving. She knew that if she did lose consciousness by any chance, she'd probably die right there. By late afternoon, Val was actually nearly gone. Her strength was fading, her vision was blurring. She really didn't think at this point that she was going to make it. And that's when, as if it was divine intervention, she would hear a sound that was unnatural. It was the low thrum of a boat engine. A desperate yet relieved Val at this point clawed forward, pulling herself toward it, and through a final patch of reeds, she broke into view of the river channel. That's where a park ranger in a small aluminum boat spotted her, and at first he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He thought he was watching a movie. A blood-soaked figure collapsed on the muddy bank. He pulled ashore immediately, rushing to cover her with a blanket, and called for an emergency evacuation. And now, according to reports and also Val's writing, she only remembers fragments of the incident after this. The helicopter blades, the paramedic faces, the antiseptic smell of the hospital, those are the kind of things that she could remember. But the main thing on her mind, she has survived the jaws and death rolls of a saltwater crocodile. Val's recovery was long and brutal. She went through multiple surgeries to repair the catastrophic damage to her leg, skin grafts, stitches, and treatments to fight off the infections that come with a crocodile bite. But according to Val, the hardest part was just really not the physical pain alone, but it was the transformation that the attack made on her internally. She had gone into Kakadu as a philosopher, someone who'd written for years about humanity's place in nature. But after this attack and after this incident, her words carried a kind of authority that they hadn't before. She spoke about the experience of being caught in a death roll as not only a violent assault that one can experience from a predator, but as a complete reorientation of perspective. She argued that us humans, our fear of being eaten, our terror of being reduced to prey, lies at the root of humanity's destructive relationship with the natural world. Val said the Croc had stripped away every illusion of human superiority that she had, and I mean, she really never had any illusion of this. She was already really pro-equality when it came to animals and humans. But in those moments underwater, she was no longer separate from nature. She was a part of it, not above the food chain, not protected by her ideas, just another creature of flesh and blood. So it really gave her even more perspective on what she believed before. And the experience, as horrific as it was and as life-threatening as it was, it would basically serve as a turning point in her life and in her work. So, there you have it. One of the most insane crocodile attack survivor stories ever published. I'll say to this day that it still amazes me that anyone would even dare to traverse crocodile waters in a canoe or a kayak, despite the lower numbers. I mean, even if there's a little chance, I would not want to be in a tuna can around apex predators, especially those like crocodiles, such powerful ones. This kind of reminds me of that Hendrik Coetzee incident that saw a man plucked clean from his kayak actually by a large Nile crocodile. This happened in the Congo River. Unfortunately, Hendrik, he would not live to tell this tale, and the attack itself, it was in fact caught on camera. I'll leave that episode for you at the end screen for you guys to check out in case you haven't already. Be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons for more content like this. If you'd like to support this channel, you can join our Patreon or become a channel member using the links in the description. And once again, thanks for all the early support. You guys know me most likely from When Animals Attack. This is my new channel. I don't own that channel anymore, but once again, I really appreciate all the early support in this brand new channel's new life. Be safe out there. Till next time.